And because we value the time that you committed to this special moment in today's schedule, we'll get right to today's presentation. So the screen now is populated by a beautiful picture. It's a picture of Halifax. And it's an image of the Fairview Cove sequestration facility, looking roughly southeast with the McKay Bridge. Get my laser pointer going here. The McKay Bridge in the mid-ground, the northern tip of the what's called peninsular Halifax, the familiar trident of the smokestacks of the Tufts Cove power generating station on Dartmouth's shore. And for those of you unfamiliar with Halifax's points of interest, we'll get to location details in a moment, but first, let me situate the Fairview Cove sequestration facility, this in the foreground, what it is and why it is what it is. So the facility is an infilling project undertaken by the Halifax Port Authority beginning in 2012 in response to a demonstrated need in the commercial construction industry to dispose of acidic slate rock being produced from excavations for the new high-rise buildings being constructed on the Halifax Peninsula. And to provide a little geologic background, peninsular Halifax is made up of a very thin layer of soil covering a massive outcrop of slate bedrock. And while most slate is environmentally friendly, this slate, called the Halifax Formation, is peculiar because even though it is harmless in its solid, undisturbed state, when it's fractured or broken into fragments and exposed to the air, it leaches an offensive acid which is hazardous to all forms of life. And for this reason, the removal and disposal of Halifax Formation slate is strictly regulated. But recognize the builder's dilemma. The only way for developers to construct foundations for their new buildings on the peninsula is to break and remove the slate rock into which the massive structures are designed to set. This picture shows the foundation excavation underway into the Halifax Formation slate at the iconic and massive Nova Centre on the site of the former Chronicle Herald at Prince and Argyle Streets. And by the time this excavation reaches its lowest limit, that little 50-ton excavator, and yes, that is a 50-ton excavator, it looks so small in the picture, but it's only halfway to its destination. It'll be another 50 feet lower, down 100 feet from this edge of Market Street. This back wall will be 100 feet high. But back to the developer's dilemma, what to do with the hazardous slate? Well, as it happens, the acid in the offensive slate is rendered inert in low oxygen environments. So a plan to sequester the slate, which simply means to store it in a stable and permanent location below low tide in the Halifax Bedford Basin, was a perfect solution to the increasingly apparent problem. And as it turned out, the port had an area available for just such sequestering. This signaled the start of an infilling program through which the offensive slate could be dumped, and with that, the Fairview Cove sequestration facility was born. The Nova Centre, mentioned in this slide, was the first large commercial development to benefit from the establishment of the federally authorized, purpose-built Fairview Cove sequestration facility. By the time the last load from the Nova Centre was delivered in 2014, more than 500,000 tons of sulfide-bearing rock, acid slate, had been delivered from this site and dumped or sequestered into the Bedford Basin. So we'll quickly orient you. Obviously, Nova Scotia, the nexus of all these provincial highways, is Halifax in the center here. And at the center of that, we have this image of the Halifax region. So this is the Bedford Basin. This is Burnside. Many of you perhaps will be familiar with some of the names. Dexter Construction's head office is here in Rocky Lake and the Rocky Lake Quarry. This is the Halifax approaches. The Atlantic Ocean, of course, is out beyond to the south here. The old bridge, what we call the old bridge, the McDonald Bridge across the harbor here from Dartmouth to Halifax. The McKay Bridge across from Dartmouth to Halifax. The reason Halifax is called a peninsula, this shape I'm circumscribing here looks like a comma or an ear, is the reason it's a peninsula is because of this little sound called the Northwest Arm. It's a scenic body of water running back through to the Armdale Rotary. So Halifax is a peninsula. It's a bulge of pyritic slate rock. This spot where my cursor is now is the scene of the 1917 Halifax explosion, when the Belgian relief vessel Emo collided with the French munitions vessel Mont Blanc, causing the largest ever man-made explosion to that time, killing more than 2,000 of the young city's residents and leveling the city's north end. If you look closely, this area, this part of the peninsula is still gray. It really has not revegetated even in 105 years, as a bit of a memorial to the explosion. Also, I've seen contour maps of the harbor floor here at the point of the explosion, and believe it or not, it blew a hole into the rock at the bottom of the harbor, and scientists speculate that it evacuated all the water above it. 80 feet of water would have gone into the air and exposed the bottom to the air at that point. So the facility is in the center of this image. Again, at the beginning of the A. Murray McKay Bridge, the ramps for the bridge were built in '65, and that caused the demolition of the Africville community, which was here and now is a park in memorial. Bedford Highway is here, again, Bedford Basin, Fairview Cove Container Terminal, and the Fairview Cove Sequestration Facility. So now that you're kind of informed and situated, the next series of slides will show you the accretion of the infilling over time. So this image is from 2012, before any work was done, the initial shoreline under the Fairview Cove Sequestration Facility. If you focus a little on this arc of road, this is Africville Road, the paved road that runs by the site, it will kind of anchor the image as you see the accretion as we go through time. So this is 2011. In 2013, there's just the beginning, this is a winter picture, but just the beginning of a infilling here, and a bit of a prehensile nub of infill there. By 2014, you can see radical change there, then thanks mostly to the infill material coming from the Nova Center. You can also see the encroachment of the Fairview Cove Container Terminal's wharf, which had been expanded in that time period with help from material from the infill. This picture from 2016 shows much more infilling. Now we have the outer edge, the northern limit, basically, of the infill, which lines up with the face of the Fairview Cove Container Terminal for shipping. When they draft into the wharf, we couldn't mute beyond that point, we would cause an obstruction. You can see a network of roads beginning from cells. And in 2018, more roads, more sedimentation ponds, more cells. You can see the scales at the bottom of the entrance road here. By 2019, again, more accretion. And the last image of available on Google Earth of, I think this is about 2021, so it's actually a little behind the scenes, behind the time. But how is it possible to grow land in 70 feet of water on the south edge of the Bedford Basin? With trucks, my friends, lots and lots of trucks. For heavy construction, the most cost-effective way to move material is in bodies on wheels, in what we call dump trucks or haul units. And the haul unit would begin their round-trip journey at any one of the various construction sites by getting loaded with the slate, as this is a twin steer Sterling of Dexter's in the picture, and it's being loaded by that 50-ton excavator previously referenced. And just to circle back on the material I'm calling slate, it's the same slate that our grandparents would have used like an iPad and wrote on it with chalk when they were in school. It has its own color name, it's slate gray. But I wanted to point out too here that you can see the leaching action here, and this rock has been exposed to the air for quite a while. That's been leaching, and it gets that rusty look. And that's the evidence of the oxidization of the acid in the rock as it interacts with the oxygen. For any given year of the facility's operation, dozens of construction sites would send hundreds of haul units, making thousands of trips to the facility, delivering hundreds of thousands of tons of pyritic slate, to the extent that by 2018, more than 12 acres, or about 10 football fields of new land had been added to the shoreline of the Bedford Basin. But I want to take you back to 2018, and this image of the site as it would have appeared from the McKay Bridge. It would have been the view of the facility if you happen to be crossing the harbor from Dartmouth toward Halifax on a warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018, a day when the story of the Fairview Cove sequestration facility and all those attached to it changed forever. This image from Saltwire's Halifax Chronicle Herald shows the tragic end result of a cascading series of failures on my part at the Fairview Cove sequestration facility. My name is David Seaboyer, and my company, SiteLogic Construction Management Inc, was the site manager of the Fairview Cove sequestration facility the day that this Pete and its operator, Michael Weil, backed over the edge of the work platform and into the Bedford Basin. This picture shows the recovery of the Peterbilt tandem. Michael Weil's body had been recovered from the Halifax harbor 2 days earlier, and only 3 hours after he had drowned. This presentation in its entirety has been created and written by me and has been approved for general distribution by the Advanced Education Branch of Nova Scotia's Department of Labour, Skills and Immigration. All images and PowerPoint slides are owned by the writer, are public domain, or used with permission. The presentation was created to satisfy part of the sentence levied against me and my company by His Honor Justice Gregor Lenehan of the Nova Scotia Provincial Court. As part of the October 13th, 2020 sentences against me and my company, and under the terms of the creative sentencing program, I was ordered to make and present 10 one-hour safety presentations to audiences approved by the Department of Labor, and to present the 10th before April 2022. And on March 14th, 2022, I fulfilled that requirement as I made the last mandated safety presentation to 100 assembled owner-operators and members of the Nova Scotia Truckers Association. The next few slides will sketch out the facts of the tragic fatality and the case against me and my company. These are taken directly from the court records and are from the 36 statements which represent the agreed facts of the case against me and my company. All 36 agreed facts will appear on the screen. I'll read a condensed version for the sake of time. But just to provide a little background and context, 22 months after the incident, on the 25th of May 2020, I was served with notice on 24 charges under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, 12 against my company, 12 against me personally as the company director. I was ordered to appear in Nova Scotia Provincial Court to answer the charges. The day after being served, I wrote and submitted to the Crown Prosecutor a document acknowledging my responsibility, my participation, confessing my guilt, and as a result was able to make arrangement with the Crown Prosecutor to plead guilty to 4 of the charges and to appear in Nova Scotia Provincial Court for sentencing on 13 October 2020. On that day in the fall of 2020, my company was fined. I was fined personally also, and the safety presentation order was levied. I point this out to emphasize the stark reality that after 40 years of supervising employees on work sites and at 63 years old at the time, at a time when I was looking at easing into some sort of retirement, the last place on earth I expected to be on the 13th of October 2020 was standing alone in a tomb-silent courtroom in front of a red-robed, white-haired provincial judge, listening to him sternly declare that a sentence that would signal the end of my company, the end of my personal financial security, the shame-riddled end of my construction career, a bewildering end to too many important relationships, and the beginning of a troubled life of mind-numbing instability pocked by lawsuits and threats. And as I read through these agreed facts, I want you to consider that in the place where the statements use my name, my family's name, it could just as easily be your name, your family's name. And when you see on the screen the name of my former company, it could just as readily be your company's name being read out in court, being printed in the newspaper, and being somberly spoken by Anthony Germain on the 6 o'clock evening news. On Monday, July 9, 2018, Michael Glenn Weil drowned while dumping material at the Fairview Cove Sequestration Facility, 6245 Africville Road, Halifax, Nova Scotia. Michael Weil was 44 years old. The facility is an infilling project being undertaken by the Halifax Port Authority at 6245 Halifax. David Seaboyer is SCMI's recognized agent and president. Seaboyer and SCMI's sole employee and representative on the facility project. SCMI has entered guilty pleas to counts 7 and 8. David Seaboyer has entered guilty pleas to counts 19 and 20. On July 9, 2018, Michael Weil was employed as a haul unit operator, dump truck driver with Scotiascapes Landscaping Incorporated, a contractor working on the facility project. Mr. Weil was tasked with picking up pyretic slate material from a local construction project, hauling it to the facility and dumping it into the Bedford Basin. On July 9, 2018, SCMI Seaboyer was the site manager at the facility, responsible for overseeing daily operations, including dumping. On July 9, 2018, J.R. Eisner Contracting, JRECL, a contracting company, was working at the facility site as the placement contractor. The role of the placement contractor was to supply heavy equipment and manpower for the daily operations at the facility, including moving materials, constructing and maintaining the safe dump ramp, and acting as spotter. JRECL employees at the facility worked under the direction of Seaboyer as site manager. At 6:15 a.m., Seaboyer set out the required truck turning signage, checked the weigh scales, checked the working face where the dumping was to occur that day. At 7 a.m., Seaboyer received a text from the workplace party overseeing the loading of haul units, Atlantic Road Construction and Paving. ARCP provided the license plate numbers for the 11 haul units scheduled to be delivering loads to the facility on July 9, 2018. 7 a.m., Seaboyer instructed the placement contractor site foreman to go to the other end of the facility to work on an unrelated task and to keep an eye on the dumping of the slate in case it began to back up. The facility began to receive trucks, also called haul unit, at 7 a.m. The first haul unit arrived at the weigh scales at 7:15 a.m. Seaboyer directed the driver to the working face and dumping location for that day. Michael Weil entered the facility with his first load at 7:27 a.m. He passed through the weigh scales, truck was weighed, he was directed to the working face. Weil delivered and dumped his first load without incident. At 7:51 a.m., Weil re-entered the facility with his second load of the day. CCTV footage shows Weil passing through the weigh scale and driving to the working face, which at that time was located on the peninsula at the water's edge. Mr. Weil began to back the haul unit toward the working face in preparation for dumping. While the CCTV does not capture the truck going into the water, very shortly after, Weil is seen backing up, a splash of water can be seen on the far side of the CCTV video where the working face is located. Scalehouse records show that the next haul unit entering the site and dumped their material without incident at 7:57 a.m., 6 minutes later. This driver did not note any disturbance in or around the water's edge or the working face. At approximately 9:40 a.m., a maintenance supervisor with the Halifax Harbour Bridges working on the McKay Bridge recorded a body floating in the water at the north side of the bridge. This was later determined to be Michael Weil. At 11:30 a.m., Seaboyer noted that Mr. Weil's haul unit had not returned to the facility with his third load. He reported this to ARCP. At 2:40 p.m., ARCP called Seaboyer and advised that a body had been recovered in the harbor and that it was believed Mr. Weil and his truck had gone into the water. At 3:10 p.m., HPA's environmental manager arrived at the facility and ordered that all dumping be stopped. From the time Mr. Weil was observed entering the facility at 7:51 up until dumping operations were ceased at 3:40 p.m., 149 loads had been dumped in the area where Mr. Weil had gone into the harbor, causing the area to be extended by approximately 4 feet. On July 10, 2018, an RCMP dive team located Mr. Weil's truck in the Bedford Basin, approximately 60 to 70 feet deep in the water. The haul unit was found facing forward with its load intact. The driver's side window and door were open. The truck bed was not engaged to be in the up or dumping position. The tailgate was still locked, did not appear to have been engaged or open to initiate the dumping process. The box lift control was found in the neutral position. Examination of the truck found no mechanical deficiencies such as loss of brakes. On July 10, 2018, the medical examiner's office confirmed Mr. Weil's cause of death to be drowning. The working face was to include an inclined safe dump ramp where drivers would back up their haul units and dump their loads. The safe dump ramp was to be constructed and actively maintained by JRECL excavators at the direction of SCMI Seaboyer. A spotter was to be present at the working face to direct and assist the driver during the dumping. The position of spotter was to be performed by JRECL employees at the direction of SCMI Seaboyer. SCMI Seaboyer have pled guilty to the following occupational health and safety offenses. SiteLogic, being a contractor under the Act, failed to take every precaution that is reasonable in the circumstances to ensure the health or safety of persons at or near the workplace. To wit, failed to ensure a spotter was in place at the working face to herd, direct, manage, and assist operators when dumping slate. Contrary to Section 14A of the Act, thereby committing an offense contrary to Section 74(1)A of the Act. Seaboyer is an officer, director, manager, or agent of SiteLogic, directed, authorized, assented to, acquiesced, or participated in the failure by SiteLogic, being a contractor under the Act, to take every precaution that is reasonable in the circumstances to ensure the health or safety of persons at or near the workplace, to wit, to ensure a spotter was in place at the working face to herd, direct, manage, and assist operators when dumping slate. Contrary to Section 14A of the Act, thereby committing an offense contrary to Section 74(1)A of the Act. The use of a spotter, also known as a checker, was added to the project in 2014. Contract documents for the project provided that the position of spotter was to be performed by JRECL employees at the direction of SCMI Seaboyer. No spotter was in use on July 9, 2018. Had a spotter position been utilized at the time of the incident, this person would have ensured the safe dump ramp was in place and directed Mr. Weil during the dumping. If, despite these safety measures, Mr. Weil and his haul unit went into the basin, the spotter would have been able to take immediate measures to assist. SCMI Seaboyer admit that ensuring a spotter was present at the working face was a reasonable safety precaution that they ought to have taken to ensure the health and safety of persons at or near the working place, including Mr. Weil. SCMI Seaboyer have pled guilty to the following occupational health and safety offenses. SiteLogic, a contractor under the Act, failed to take every precaution that is reasonable in the circumstances to ensure the health or safety of persons at or near the workplace, to wit, failed to ensure the site-specific safety requirement of a safe dump ramp was in place at the working face and being used by operators when dumping slate, contrary to Section 14A of the Act, thereby committing an offense contrary to Section 74(1)A of the Act. Seaboyer, as an officer, director, manager, or agent of SiteLogic, directed, authorized, assented to, acquiesced, or participated in the failure by SCMI, being a contractor under the Act, to take every precaution that is reasonable in the circumstances to ensure the health or safety of persons at or near the workplace, to wit, to ensure the site-specific safety requirement of a safe dump ramp was in place at the working face and being used by operators when dumping slate, contrary to Section 14A of the Act, thereby committing an offense contrary to Section 74(1)A of the Act. SCMI Seaboyer admit that safety planning for the facility infilling project identified the construction and use of a safe dump ramp at the working face, but no safe dump ramp was in place at the working face where Mr. Weil went into the basin. This is an image of a safe dump ramp being added to the top of the deck. You can see that the lighter brown material is the slate. The darker brown is a common material added in order to give that positive upslope to the arse end of the tandem truck. So that's the wedge of material under the truck to kick it up a little. This is my spotter. This is a picture from 2016, back when we were using a spotter more regularly. "35. Had a safe dump ramp been utilized at the time of the incident, it would have provided Mr. Weil a safe place to back up his haul unit and dump the slate. SCMI and Seaboyer admit that ensuring a safe dump ramp was in place and maintained at the working face was a responsible safety precaution, reasonable safety precaution that they ought to have taken on the incident date to ensure the health and safety of persons at or near the workplace, including Mr. Weil. These 36 facts were sufficient evidence to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the provincial court my culpability for the ensuing consequences and my company's seeming callous disregard for the welfare of workers at the facility. But the truth is that the mistakes made at the facility were the result of a years-long creeping sleepiness about safety, a slow but steadily growing disregard for the awful possibilities when you're working at the margins of a merciless Atlantic Ocean. The intervening 4 years since the workplace fatality have served to drain away some of the horror and confusion of that day's events and have allowed me some insight into just how it became possible to miss the flashing lights and warning signs which might have changed the outcome of that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. And the purpose of me fulfilling the requirement of my sentence in bringing this presentation to you today is that I might convince you of the utterly benign yet utterly malignant possibility that your workplace, your home, your fishing camp, your office, your classroom, your lunchroom, any place you can go can so easily succumb to the same stupefying miasma, the same enveloping fog that so easily blinds one to the potential hazards hiding in the safest places. Here's what I've learned about the mistakes I made. Mistake number 1, other work. Agreed fact number 11 says that at 7 a.m., Seaboyer instructed the placement contractor's site foreman to go to the other end of the facility to work on an unrelated task. After serving as the placement contractor for 6 of the previous 7 years, it's understandable that the daily work routine would become a daily routine. And for this placement contractor, having been selected to construct the initial working platform and then being on site for virtually every load of slate dumped into the Bedford Basin since that day in 2012, well, that'll develop efficiencies. And if it's true that practice makes perfect, this placement contractor had achieved perfection in the handling of the slate at the edge of the working platform. They were very familiar with the facility's operations, very efficient with the daily rhythm of placing, and with the management of the facility, with me. And that efficiency and effort produced the observation that the placement contractor had untapped capacity, meaning they weren't very busy. And they had proven capable of taking on other port work beyond the simple duties of placing the materials delivered to the site. Between 2012 and 2018, the placement contractor was tasked with various other construction projects in addition to, but unrelated to the facility. For example, they provided support for the Fairview Cove Container Terminal's Northeast Wharf expansion. We saw the evidence of that in the slides. They worked on the construction and filling of numerous containment cells, and at the time of the workplace fatality, this placement contractor was heavily engaged in the Halifax Port Authority's multi-year environmental remediation project of the former Halifax City dump, adjacent to the facility, about 3/4 of a kilometer to the southwest, barely in sight of the working places of the facility's working platform. This other work meant that the placement contractor was expending very little effort at the facility's working platform. Even a casual observer could see that the time spent on these other tasks away from the facility's working platform made the placement contractor's duties on the working platform, duties such as tending the haul units, moving the slate, compacting the edge, maintaining the road system, watching for hazards at the work face, all these tasks finished a distant second in priority to the other work. However, despite only being at the working face a very few hours a day, the business of the Fairview Cove sequestration facility was percolating along very nicely. Operation costs were way down, production way up. And the benefit of the reduced cost to the facility operations was noticed and commended during operational reviews. It's only in hindsight that it's clear that the seeds of disaster were being sown in the slow hollowing out of resources from the working face in favor of the other work. Mistake number 2, no spotter. Agreed fact number 26 told us no spotter was in use on July 9, 2018. There was no spotter or checker waiting to direct Michael Weil at the edge of the working platform on that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. But the truth is, over the preceding 3 years, it was only very infrequently that there had been a person specifically tasked with that function. The normal routine, the established and accepted practice, was for the truck drivers to navigate their own path from the scales to the working face and to manage the dumping of the loads for themselves. And there are numerous reasons for this practice, all of which made perfect sense at the time of their reasoning, and none of which are acceptable after a tragedy like the events of 09 July 2018. All the good reasons in the world don't add up to a satisfactory explanation when tragedy strikes. But what could a spotter have done? It's a fair question. Obviously, one person is helpless to change the outcome and could only have watched in abject horror, forever scarred by the scene as 30 tons of iron and rock are swallowed up in 70 feet of the basin's waters, taking with it the life of a father, a partner, a son, a friend, a co-worker. But a spotter would have raised an early alarm and would certainly have brought a halt to the dumping operations which continued for hours, ignorant of the awful unseen events. And given the fact that there wasn't another haul unit on the platform at the tragic moment, a spotter would have at least been a witness to the tragedy and could have perhaps provided insight into some of the inexplicable questions that would spring from and remain forever unanswered by the day's tragic end. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight and the harsh verdict of the provincial court, I should have insisted on maintaining the practice despite all the reasons to the contrary. If I'd only made a firm stand on keeping a spotter on the edge, if I'd only drawn a line in the sand over the issue, even to the point of quitting, unless that position was immediately and permanently filled. But all the good that could have come from having a spotter on the edge is of no consequence now, because to my eternal shame, I failed to make sure that a spotter was on the edge on that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. Mistake number 3, no site manager. Agreed fact number 13 told us that Mr. Weil entered the facility with his first load at 7:27. He passed through the weigh scale, his truck was weighed, and he was directed to the working face. Although not explicitly stated in this agreed fact, what is evident and undisputed is the fact that on the day of the workplace fatality, instead of performing the duties of the site manager was performing the duties of the scale person, receiving, weighing, recording, and transacting the truckloads of slate as they arrived on the scales. And this had been the awful reality for 6 months leading up to the workplace fatality, ever since the port installed new scale software management system at the scales. Up until 2017, there had been a dedicated scale person who operated the scales and manually recorded the weights of each truck as they came to the facility. But in January 2018, scale software was installed to automate and validate the scale transactions. The software eliminated the use of the manual recording function. And because the software was difficult, it was bug-ridden, still being written by IT, the daily operating of the scales required computer skills beyond the current scale person's ability. Therefore, the dedicated scale person's job was eliminated, but no replacement was provided. This meant, however, unfortunately, that I, as the site manager, was the only person capable of running the new scale configuration. So instead of performing the duties of the site manager, supervising, monitoring, directing, observing, assessing, communicating, calculating, generally being visible to the operators and drivers, the facility's site manager was performing the duties of the scale person, receiving, weighing, recording, and transacting the truckloads of slate as they arrived on the scales. So what would seem a relatively minor change in the facility's procedures, this change created a massive change in the function and the safe functionality of the facility, the full and disastrous effect of which no one could have predicted. This change meant that on any and every day when trucks were hauling slate into the facility and end dumping over the edge of the Bedford Basin, the site manager would have to set aside all management duties in order to keep things going, and would be unable to leave the scale house. And all managers know this truth, established from time immemorial. Just keep things going. The job of the manager is to do whatever needs to be done to keep the operations operating. When the operations threaten to go off the rails, as managers, we beg our confederates and subordinates to keep things running until I can get there, or The cavalry's coming, but you need to find some way to hold the fort until they arrive. Whatever needs to be done, convincing the reluctant, cutting the grass, cutting a few corners, coaxing the dilatory, pumping up those whose flagging effort is necessary to the operation. Just keep things going. Except when things are going in the wrong direction. You see, when the boat is headed for the rocks, it's definitely not better to keep it going. You see, I had lost my compass. I had lost the ability to see the potential results of the decisions being made, the directions being demanded, procedures being ignored, the risk being accepted. The facility was in dire trouble, and I could not see it. I was so blinded by the fiery glow of the financial success that what I thought was stars aligning was actually stars colliding. Once again, it was my failure to accurately predict the outcome of these combined realities which conspired to create the conditions which could lead to Michael Wild's death on that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. But the fact that the site manager was sitting at the scale desk, literally blind to the fact that a tandem truck was backing into the Bedford Basin, unseen by anyone, well, that's as inexcusable a fact as you can conjure up. But this was the fact on that day. And it's a clear demonstration of my inability to effectively manage and ensure the safety of those who came to the facility. Framed in its most stark reality, my mistakes contributed to the tragedy at the FCSF on that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. Hindsight clearly demonstrates that since 2013, I consented to the facility's placement contractor being tasked with the other work which routinely took them away from the primary task of tending the working platform and the haul units, which dumping at the edge of the Bedford Basin. Since 2015, I consented to the elimination of the regular use of spotter at the water's edge. And since December 2017, I allowed for conditions at the facility to deteriorate to the point where the duties of the site manager were set aside, shelved, in order to keep the sales transactions going. This condition left the operations on the facility's working platform to the vagaries of blind luck and to the machinations of fate itself. These factors point clearly to the root cause: my failure to stand firm on the immediate need for either a scale person or a new site manager. I was too easily pushed off subject, too reticent to rock the boat, too slow to seize the moment, too dull to forecast the impossible, which ultimately became the tragic reality on that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. Within a few weeks of the workplace fatality, I had ended my company's relationship with the port, and suddenly, with plenty of time to reflect, had begun the painful process of searching for those root causes, leading to the tragic consequences at the facility. I certainly wanted to avoid carrying forward bad habits and failed practices to other projects and to other employers. This process led to a major rethink of my overall philosophy about work itself. One day, when I was reviewing my resume, I was shocked to read one particular attribute displayed prominently. This is a cut from my CV from that time. Did you catch it? Vigorous pursuit of the client's highest interest. There should be no doubt as to what is the client's highest interest. That bullet is code for, trust me, I'll keep a keen focus on your bottom line. Or don't worry, your profit margins are safe under my management. In that boast, you can clearly see the withered fruit of an outdated and dangerous management style, and clear evidence of a willingness to sacrifice almost anything in pursuit of the client's profit. This discovery, for me, was revelatory. The fog of war, produced from decades of conflicts on hundreds of construction sites, slowly cleared and allowed the truth to emerge into view, the truth of what is really important on any construction site, the vital importance of maintaining a workplace that is safe for all who enter it, a workplace that is constantly on alert for signs of the advance of unsafe habits and which permits the worker to work unfettered by fear of personal injury, a workplace that gets noticed for the health, happiness, stability, and well-being of its workforce. My new and enduring commitment is to never again diminish the essential value of the human effort necessary to make the work site actually work. You see, until robots replace us all, it will only be the goodwill, the effective training, the proper equipping, productive communication, and hard work of the people plying their trades day after day that will safely produce the goods and services our society needs, whether in a boardroom, an operating theater, a hotel conference room, or on your construction site. And it is the intrinsic essential value of these people that is paramount on any site, in any workplace, in any work environment. My highest duty of care is to the worker, to ensure the provision and maintenance of safe and secure work environments for every worker in every workplace under my supervision. My highest duty of care is not to a balance sheet, not to a profit margin, but to the most important component of every workplace, the worker. And this is my commitment. You cannot imagine how dearly I wish that Michael Weil had finished his shift, parked his truck, and gone home to his family on that warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018. But I can also assure you, all the wishing in the world will not change the outcome of that awful day. No matter how hard I try, how sincerely I wish, how tightly I close my eyes and clench my fists, the awful reality of that day can never change. That tragic chapter has been written, and the ink of that story is, most assuredly, indelible. But the small light in the deep darkness of that darkest of days is found in the reality of this thought. Change is possible. We can bring measurable good from the immeasurable tragedy. We can focus our minds and spend our efforts toward preventing similar tragedy from taking place at your business, at your shop or office or field, at your work site or on your boat or in your truck, in your home or in your cottage. The old maxim says, it's good to learn from our mistakes, even better to learn from someone else's. And if that's true, this is your opportunity to learn from my mistakes, to take to heart just how easily your story becomes altogether too similar to mine. My wife's coffee mug. We like the saying, life is simple, it's just not easy. It can so readily be applied to so many other of life's big subjects like family, love, honor, faith, and change. Because change is simple, it's just not easy. Whether it's the kind of change of diet, for example, that lowers the number on the bathroom scales, or a change in lifestyle that reduces your carbon footprint, change is simple and hard, and yes, necessary, but also possible. Change is possible because by simply taking the decision and having the strength of will to weather the storm, to stick with it, we can change the legacy of that awful day into an operator's manual on how to avoid the seeds of disaster that can so insidiously produce that kind of day. Because I think we are all acutely aware that if tragedy like this can visit Michael Weil on a warm, cloudless Monday in July 2018, tragedy can also visit the unsuspecting on some other perfect day at a time when it is least expected. Thank you so much for the courtesy of your time and attention.